Municipal workers was painting fresh lines on the street. The night was quiet. No traffic, no police, nothing unusual. Then headlights appeared at the far end of the avenue. Multiple SUVs rolled in together, moving in formation. Before the workers could react, masked men jumped out, rifles raised. They were forced to the ground, their vests and tools taken. Within seconds, the workers were no longer city employees. They were hostages. It was the opening move of a coordinated assault. Within minutes, roads were blocked. Lookout positions established and gunfire erupted near police headquarters. Explosives shook the city center. The attackers weren't here for a single branch or a handful of ATMs. Their objective was far greater. The Banco do Brasil treasury, the largest cash vault in southern Brazil. By the time the night was over, Criciúma would witness one of the most audacious robberies in the nation's history. November 30th, 2020. Criciúma, Santa Catarina. The city was calm as the night approached. Most residents were at home, winding down from the start of the work week. Stores had closed, traffic had thinned, and only a few workers remained on duty in the streets. Nothing suggested that within minutes the city would be transformed into the stage Verone of Brazil's most violent robberies. At the Municipal Transport Department, Sergio Eduardo Ferm was finishing his shift with two colleagues, Marcelo and Juliano. Around 11:30 p.m., he suggested a break. They stopped near Sosa Street to eat something. That's when Sergio noticed it. A car appeared, driving the wrong way down the street. At first, it seemed like a mistake, but then the vehicle slowed, stopped at an intersection, and four men stepped out. They were dressed entirely in black heavy clothes, balaclavas, gloves, only their eyes visible. Each man carried a long rifle, weapons that Sergio had only ever seen in pictures, military firearms, large and heavy. The orders were quick and sharp. Turn off the truck. Remove your shirts. Stand against the corner. Sergio and his colleagues obeyed immediately. Then the shooting started. Gunfire erupted across the city, echoing between the buildings. Seconds later, explosions shook the ground. What had started as a strange encounter on a quiet street was now part of a coordinated assault on the entire city center. At that same moment, a convoy of SUVs was moving into Criciúma, Bodies, Mercedes, Land Rovers, driving in formation, headlights off, engines roaring low. Inside were dozens of men, around 30 in total, heavily armed and moving with precision. As they reached the city center, the convoy split into separate groups. One group drove directly to the military police battalion, opening fire on the building to pin down officers. Automatic bursts raked the walls, forcing police inside to take cover. Another group blocked intersections with stolen trucks, which they set on fire. Roads were cut off, access routes sealed. Others unloaded spike strips and improvised bombs, ensuring no reinforcements could enter. The main unit positioned itself near the banks of the heart of downtown. The city was being divided piece by piece under their control. Civilians unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time were taken immediately. Road workers finishing their shifts, municipal employees on late duty, and motorists passing through. All were forced out of their vehicles, stripped of their shirts, and ordered to sit on crosswalks or stand in the open with their hands visible. The attackers lined them up at intersections and in front of key buildings, turning them into human shields. Hostages sat on the cold asphalt, rifles pointed at their backs while convoys of SUVs rolled past. For the hostages, there was no escape. Some lit cigarettes with trembling hands. Others stared silently at the ground. For nearly 2 hours they remained there, surrounded by gunmen and explosions. The firepower on display stunned everyone who witnessed it. The attackers carried AK-47s, AR-15s, and 50-caliber machine guns mounted on tripods or fired from vehicles. These were weapons designed for war, capable of cutting through armored vehicles or concrete walls. Tracer rounds streaked across the night sky, red and green lines flashing through the darkness. Explosions thundered from the banks and intersections, shaking windows across the city. More than 200 kilos of explosives would later be recovered. Devices powerful enough to destroy entire blocks. The criminals weren't just armed. They were coordinated. Teams of shooters maintained constant suppressive fire, while others moved methodically to secure the streets. Every shot had a purpose: keep the police pinned, keep civilians frozen, and keep the city under control. Inside the military police headquarters, officers quickly realized they were trapped. Kasuma's small force had no armored vehicles, no heavy rifles, and only a limited supply of ballistic vests. Reinforcements from neighboring towns would take hours to arrive. For now, the officers could only take cover and wait. Over the radio, desperate calls went out. Priority. Priority. Thesity Center is surrounded. Officers under fire, but no reinforcements came. The attackers had blocked every route into the city with fire, bombs, and trucks, and thus Kasuma was sealed. By 11:50 p.m., the first videos began appearing online. Residents filmed tracer rounds cutting through the night sky, explosions echoing between buildings. Windows rattled, alarms blared, dogs barked across neighborhoods. The local digital news portal tapped into the police radio and launched a live stream. Within minutes, more than 112,000 people were watching in real time as the siege unfolded. The feed captured the urgency of the night. Explosions in the background. Gunshots echo without pause. Officers on the radio are repeating the same words, asking for help from the nearby cities. On the streets, convoys of SUVs patrolled with doors open, gunmen leaning out with rifles ready, fire spurned at intersections. Hostages sat frozen on sidewalks lit by the glow of burning vehicles. Kasuma, a city of $200,000, had been transformed in less than half an hour. For that night, it no longer belonged to its residents. It belonged to the attackers. By midnight, the city center was sealed. The police were pinned inside their own headquarters. Hostages were scattered at intersections. Roads were blocked with burning trucks and explosives. Only then did the real target become clear. At first, many believed the gunmen were attacking the police barracks or striking at ATMs. But this was no ordinary bank job. The destination was the Banco do Brasil treasury, a central vault where money from multiple banks in the region was stored. Tens of millions of RIA sat behind reinforced walls. That was what the attackers had come for. At 1 a.m., the first explosion shook downtown Kasuma. Witnesses described a deafening blast that rattled windows blocks away. Smoke and dust poured into the street. Seconds later came a second detonation, then a third. The attackers were using dynamite placed with precision to tear open the vault. After each blast, teams outside unleashed automatic fire into the air, making sure no one dared to interfere. The gunfire echoed nonstop, drowning out alarms and church bells. Inside the police barracks, officers heard every explosion, but could do nothing. They had no line of approach, no protection against the weapons deployed on the streets. For them, Thesity felt lost. Minutes later, radio chatter picked up by investigators confirmed it. The vault is open. Bring the cars. The convoy of luxury vehicles moved into position, some armored engines idling under the cover of gunfire. Hostages, including Sergio and other workers taken earlier, were ordered into action. Armed men shoved bundles of cash into their arms and forced them to carry it outside. Piles of money began forming on the sidewalks, stacked neatly in the open under the glow of fires burning nearby. One line after another, the hostages carried bags from the treasury to the waiting vehicles. Armed men checked each bundle, then loaded it into trunks and back seats with military precision. The system ran smoothly like a machine. Sergio would later recall how quickly it all moved. Hostages carrying, gunmen watching, drivers packing, engines running. 10 to 15 minutes were enough to drain the vault. At one point, a gunman tore open a bag and tossed handfuls of bills into the air. Banknotes scattered across the pavement, drifting with the smoke. Residents watching from their windows later came down to collect what had been left behind. Police would later estimate that between 2 and 5 million RIA were abandoned in the chaos. Money literally left lying in the street. Theirs disappeared into the convoy. When the last bag was loaded, the order was given. Hostages were to remain in place. Armed men pointed their rifles one last time, ensuring no one dared to move. Then, just after 2 a.m., the engines roared. The convoy began rolling out of Kasuma. Witnesses described the moment as disturbingly calm. Vehicles did not speed away. Instead, they drove slowly, no faster than 20 km/h. Gunmen leaned out of the windows and doors, rifles aimed in every direction. Behind them, the city smoldered. At least 2 trucks burned across main avenues, blocking any chance of pursuit. Explosives and spike strips were left scattered on the streets. Reinforcements arriving from neighboring towns were forced to stop. Unable to enter, the convoy split into smaller groups as it reached the outskirts. Each SUV carried cash, weapons, and men ready to open fire if pursued, but no pursuit came. Krusuma's police, outnumbered and outgunned, could do nothing but listen to the sound of engines fading into the night. When silence finally returned, residents cautiously stepped outside. Near the Banco do Brasil, bills still littered the sidewalks from the final loading. Some people rushed to collect what had been scattered in the smoke. Others stared in disbelief at the blackened trucks and shattered buildings. For them, the siege was over. For the attackers, it had only reached its halfway point. The convoy loaded with tens of millions of RA was now gone. When the gunfire stopped, and the convoy of luxury vehicles disappeared into the night, Krusuma was left in ruins. Burned-out trucks blocked avenues. Spent shells and shattered glass littered the streets. The city treasury was gutted, its vault blasted open with explosives. Forensic teams arrived at dawn, beginning the slow process of piecing together how one of Brazil's most violent robberies had unfolded. At 6:30 a.m., officers searching the rural outskirts of the city made a critical discovery. In Acorn Field in nearby Nova, 10 abandoned vehicles stood hidden among the crops. 9 were armored. Most had been crudely repainted black, covering their original colors, but investigators quickly determined they were part of the convoy scene leaving the city. Inside, forensic experts recovered fingerprints, shell casings, and other traces of DNA. Bloodstains on the seats confirmed what witnesses had already suggested. At least one member of the gang had been injured during the blasts that tore open the vault. A warehouse close to the field revealed even more. Walls were splattered with black paint, rollers and brushes discarded on the floor. Piles of gloves, rags, and clothing stained with gunpowder, and blood lay scattered in corners. A makeshift medical kit suggested the criminals had treated the wounded, there before escaping again. This was no hasty retreat. It was a carefully planned step-over, part of a logistics chain designed weeks in advance. Tips from local residents began arriving quickly in Três Cachoeiras, a rural community hours from Krusuma. Neighbors reported unusual activity at a rented farmhouse. A group of men had been living there for weeks, claiming to be tourists. They drove. Expensive cars played loud music and held late-night barbecues. It was behavior that drew attention in a quiet rural town. When police raided the property, they found evidence linking the group directly to the heist. Maps of Krusuma with routes marked, radios tuned to police frequencies, tactical gear, and empty ammunition boxes. Mattresses and food supplies showed Thiemann had been living there comfortably, preparing for the robbery well in advance. The rent had been paid in cash, around 15,000 Brazilian real, to clear the property quickly. As the investigation expanded, officers identified 9 different properties across Santa Catarina and Rio Grande do Sul used as safe houses. Each had a role. Some were used to store vehicles, others to hide weapons and explosives. A few were simply temporary residences, giving the criminals places to stay while posing as families or tourists. These discoveries proved the assault on Krusuma had not been improvised. It had been staged like a military campaign with resources spread across multiple states. While forensic teams worked the safe houses, investigators followed another trail. Phones, bank records, and surveillance footage. Intercepted calls revealed unusual contacts between suspects in Santa Catarina and operatives in São Paulo. Phone signals placed key figures near the bank on the night of the robbery. Bank transfers showed sudden bursts of unexplained income for individuals, already linked to organized crime. Surveillance footage confirmed movements. Cars seen days earlier at gas stations and stores matched the vehicles abandoned in Nova. Security cameras captured suspects buying supplies, fueling vehicles, and moving between safe houses, and piece by piece, investigators rebuilt the operation's timeline. All the evidence pointed in one direction. the Primero Comando de Capital, or better, known as the PCC. Born in the prisons of Sao Paulo after the 1992 Caranura massacre, the PCC had grown from an inmate alliance into Brazil's largest and most dangerous criminal faction. By 2020, it controlled much of the drug trade in Brazil, had an estimated 40,000 members, and maintained ties with cartels in Mexico, Colombia, and Europe. The sheer scale of the Criciúma heist, the weapons, the armored vehicles, the months of preparation, fit the PCC's profile perfectly. Local gangs could never have acquired such resources. Only an organization with the PCC's structure and reach could have executed it. The first major arrest came weeks later in Gramado, a tourist city in Rio Grande do Sul. Investigators had traced 2 suspects to a rented house where they were hiding with their partners. The plan was simple: blend in as couples on vacation far from the chaos of Santa Catarina. When police moved in, one suspect tried to flee into the dense forest but was quickly captured. The other was taken inside the house without resistance. Both were identified as seasoned PC cooperatives who had played direct roles in the Criciúma assault. The real breakthrough came with the capture of Mércio Geraldo Alves Ferrer, known as Buddha. Buddha was not just another foot soldier. He was one of the PCC's top street leaders, a trusted figure with direct links to the faction's leadership under Marcola. For investigators, his arrest was confirmation. The Criciúma heist was not a freelance operation. It had been coordinated by the PCC itself. Buddha's capture also revealed details of how the assault had been financed. Evidence suggested he had overseen the transfer of funds used to pay for vehicles, explosives, and safe houses. His leadership role placed him at the heart of the planning. Attention then turned to a couple. Investigators identified as key logisticians, Cauã Rafaela Dutra and Alexandro Squá Antonio. The press dubbed them Brazil's Bonnie and Clyde. They had not been on the streets carrying rifles, but their role was just as critical. Cauã and Alexandro had arranged vehicles, rented warehouses, and coordinated payments to their members. They were last seen in Gramado, leaving hours before the raid that caught their associates. 4 months. They moved across different states using false identities and short-term rentals to stay ahead of the police. Their run ended 3 months later in the interior of Sao Paulo. A joint task force surrounded their hideout and arrested them without incident. While they never touched the bank vault, prosecutors later argued the operation could not have succeeded without their logistical support. In total, 17 suspects were convicted for their roles in the Criciúma heist. Sentences ranged from 36 to 50 years. Some were the men were carrying rifles through thieves' streets. Others were logisticians or safe house managers. Together they formed the network that made the robbery possible. But even with convictions, one critical piece was missing. The money. Authorities believe hundreds of millions of RIT were stolen. Yet only around 1 million was ever recovered. Most of it from the bills scattered outside the bank that night. The rest had vanished. Financial intelligence units traced fragments of the cash in the weeks after the robbery. Some flowed into construction firms through fake contracts. Other amounts were funneled through NOSs and shell companies controlled by PCC associates. Within weeks, the trail went cold. The money had been absorbed into laundering networks sophisticated enough to move it out of reach. For investigators, this was the most frustrating reality. The gunmen could be arrested, but the fortune they had risked, everything for, was already gone. The Criciúma heist proved something investigators already feared, that the PCC had the ability to strike far from its home base in Sao Paulo, using overwhelming firepower to paralyze entire cities.